Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be in and watching this. My name is Matthew French. I'm currently living in Mihara City in Hiroshima in Japan. And you can find my contact details there, matthewfrench@lexusandlines.com. Today I'll be giving a brief overview of my dissertation with the University of Birmingham and the MA TESOL. I'll probably be moving at a fairly fast rate. So if you do have any questions or anything you want to say to me, please drop me a line. I'll try and remember to look at the camera. Obviously, it's a bit above my monitor. So if I seem to be looking dead-eyed, that means I'm kind of drifting off and not focusing on the camera. So here we go. So as I said, my name is Matthew French. And I did my dissertation on a big change that was happening in my city. There's a very big push by the government in Japan to implement ICT in junior high schools and elementary schools. To a lesser extent, high schools. I think a lot of high schools are left to their own devices in terms of getting equipment, but this is a nationwide push to get equipment and teaching and new ideas into junior high school and elementary school. So this is a very big change, this introduction of ICT into the classroom, traditional classrooms. So obviously the cities and states want to make this as successful as possible. So I thought, well, why don't we see what the attitudes of the teachers involved are and what could help to implement this change. So as a brief overview, it follows a standard dissertation kind of format there. So I'll be looking at a bit of background on change and innovation, how that relates to teaching and technology, things in Japan that are maybe particular to Japan that may cause problems or maybe help, then look at the study and then some discussion and recommendations. And given that I did the study last year, 2021 in November, December, they're in the first stages of bringing in the ICT now. So we've had a few months to see just the initial issues that might have come up or potential benefits of using it. So I'll touch on those as well. So really what I was looking at here is this GIGA School Program. And this is part of the Department of Education and government's plan to really push for like a one device per student policy. So every student in class gets access to a Chromebook or something similar. There's Wi-Fi across all the schools. There's now large screen TVs in all our schools. And it may differ from school to school, or not so much school to school, but maybe city to city. But for the most part, it's this one device per child situation. At the moment, I can't speak for other cities, but it's not something where the kids are taking the computers home just yet. It is just in school. But this is a significant infrastructure project in terms of the money and the manpower power to get it out there, the work required. So it's quite a big deal. So the questions I was looking at in this study and paper were, what are the attitudes and beliefs of the teachers in Mihara relating to this change, and how can these beliefs perhaps inform the successful adoption and continued use of the technology? Not just, well, we're using what's here, we have it. This has to be a continued use situation. So what we're really dealing with here is innovation and change, and how people deal with innovation and change in the English learning environment, English teaching environment. So really, a change in this sense is it's a new idea, it's got a thought behind it, it's intentional, and it's obviously people are trying it to improve things. They're not just trying for the sake of changing things, although I think we know that does happen. And it is important to note that it does not need to be a new idea for, in general. Obviously, teaching with ICT and computers is not a new idea. It's been around for quite a while, especially in Western countries. But for Japan, it really is a big breakaway from the traditional, chalk and talk way of teaching. So it is quite a new thing for teachers to deal with here. Now, this is a big change, but regardless of whether changes are big or small, as as Mara said, most people's response is pretty much ambivalent about the whole thing. You know, the change is going to happen, and you'll get a lot of people in this late adopter stage, as you can see there in Roger's model. You definitely get some people in the early stages, and they're kind of really pushing and they're really passionate about these projects. And then you kind of get a general kind of uptake, and then it reaches some kind of point of tipping point, I guess. And then eventually even the people who are not big fans of the change will get on board. And that's where we can see the importance of people who really want to push change. But it's also very important to note with any kind of new program or change that the people who come in late are not necessarily just all stick in the muds. They're not just doing it out of just to be contrary. They might have genuine concerns, and they shouldn't be ignored for being, you know, stuck in the past or something like that. They might have genuine issues and very interesting points of view. So it's worth getting those people on board and listening to them authentically and honestly, I feel. So when you bring in change, there are going to be barriers to change. People are going to have issues with this change. And Cuban and Brickner categorize these changes as first order, which tend to be external, and second order, which tend to be internal to people. So the first order barriers, these external barriers, they're things like, you know, the lack of time, your lack of training, lack of support, and they're usually, not always, but usually relatively more straightforward to address. You know, if you don't have computers, get computers. That's a very straightforward technological fix. If you don't have more time, can we change schedules to get more time? So in general, these are more, I won't say easily addressed, but it's certainly the solutions are more clear often and potentially more concrete, I would say. Now these second order barriers, these are more about how people feel, their fears and anxieties, how they see themselves, how they see teaching, how they see their work. And unfortunately, there's no quick fixes to these solutions, because a lot of the time people don't realize they have these attitudes, or may not wish to admit they have these attitudes, which is another issue there. So it can require quite a lot of effort to overcome these barriers. So how can we help facilitate change? How can we smooth this process? So we do need to address people's attitudes and beliefs. These are major drivers for behavioural changes. We need to address their self-efficacy. Do they feel like they're having an impact, or is it just, you know, change that's thrust upon them? People are always going to struggle more with change that's kind of sent down from above, that they have no say in and are told to do things a certain way. And this can affect their motivation, and this can also roll into this idea of ideal and future selves, which is, you know, this idea of how we see ourselves in the future, how we want to be as not just as teachers but as people, and potentially just as important, how we don't want to be in the future, in this gap between where we are now and where we want to be or don't want to be, and how can we close that gap. So in terms of pedagogy and technology, perhaps a useful framework that would help here in general is the TPACK framework put forward by Ertmer and Ottenbreit-Leftwich. And I believe our keynote speaker, Elizabeth Lavallette's talk mentioned the TPACK in relation to professional development. And as you can see here, we can see this there's this technological knowledge, this pedagogical knowledge, and content knowledge. And the issue facing us as teachers, and especially Japanese teachers, often not dealt with this, is how do we combine these things together? You know, you may have the content knowledge, you know your topic down, you may even have your teaching methods down and how to teach, your pedagogical knowledge, but then you might be missing that technical knowledge. Younger teachers, in-service teachers, might have the technical knowledge and the content knowledge, but they don't have that experience with the pedagogical knowledge. So we need to look at how can we link these things together, you know, TCK and TPK, these things, and have them all in that center section, this technological, pedagogical, content knowledge, where everything's working together. So as I mentioned, you might have these in-service teachers that are quite young, and they might be considered what Prensky coined to be digital natives, whereas older people might be considered digital immigrants. And a digital native is somebody who's been surrounded by technology and computers and perhaps the internet for most of their lives, and they're thus presumed to have some kind of natural technological affinity and literacy because of this immersion. You know, they're just surrounded by technology, so therefore they know how to use this technology. To which I would ask, would you consider your students to be digital natives, as outlined by Prensky? I mean, many of you are teaching at university, so you've got people that are, 18 to 21. I'm teaching at a junior high school, so certainly they should fit within that definition. So what's your experience of working with people that are supposedly tech savvy? Have you found that they are tech savvy and have this natural affinity, or are they just like anybody else? So in terms of then that building into the Japanese context, as you may know, I mean, a lot of people watching this talk are teaching in Japan, but if not, so Japanese schools tend to be didactic, very teacher-centric. The teacher giving out the information, the students taking on the information. But that's changing, and that's being pushed by the Department of Education to be to move away from that. Computer usage, as in personal computer usage at home in Japan, is very, very low. One of the lowest in the advanced nations, actually. Not necessarily Wi-Fi access or internet access, but computer usage versus, say, smartphone usage. Digital natives and computer use in school, very low. Kids, I'm working with my kids, they don't know what the shift key does to make uppercase letters. Don't know what a browser is, what's an address that you type in for an internet site. They're very low. We had this COVID-19 impact, which actually was very, for lack of a better word, fortuitous. The timing was very good. This GIGA School Program, which is quite impressive, was being introduced. It's over 4 or 5 years being introduced, but with the advent of the coronavirus, a lot of the implementation was front-loaded. A lot of the funding was front-loaded, and getting the equipment out was really made a priority. Unfortunately, it didn't come in time for the school shutdowns in Japan, but hopefully they're kind of moving towards being prepared if something happens again. So in Mihara, how does that play out? How does the GIGA School Program play out? Well, each student gets one Chromebook. There's school-wide access points for Wi-Fi. There's a 65-inch TV in each classroom, whereas before there might be one old TV that you had to move between classrooms and book 2 weeks in advance. We're using Google Classroom, and unfortunately currently only used at school at the moment. That is, students can't take the computers home yet. But there's scope for that in the future. So in terms of finding out how teachers perceive this change, what they felt about this change, it's sought to gain insight into 4 areas: their beliefs towards technology, their use of IT in the classroom, their approach to teaching, how teachers saw themselves involved in all this, and more just direct feedback from teachers. What will help or hinder you bring this technology into class? So all the junior high school teachers in Mihara City were invited, so 182 surveys were given out, and 99 surveys were returned, so approximately half returned, but only 77 were deemed 100% complete. There's about 14 that were, about that amount that was not quite there. There was a couple that almost made it and then just stopped at the last minute, so it's very hard to say. The survey was anonymous, completely anonymous, so it was difficult to follow up why people didn't finish the survey. So just as a bit of an overview, there was quite a mix between teachers that were, say, for example, under 40 or 41 to 50 and then over 41. Mix between genders was pretty much down the middle. Years teaching, there seemed to be a combined gap of 1 to 10 years teaching versus more than 10 years teaching. There's a significant amount of teachers over 15 years experience. and a mix of how many grades they had taught and had they been a homeroom teacher before in terms of the time pressures on teachers. So the survey was conducted online using the Qualtrics system. Instructions were provided in Japanese. Everybody was given a QR code with an individual login code. This was done with a printed handout sheet because unfortunately the teachers didn't have their Chromebooks yet. The responses were not linked to individuals. There was no way I could tell who had submitted what answers, but I could identify the school via the code generated, just to see who had been, which schools had been very helpful, just for my own edification. So we sought to find out, well, just general background information, how you use technology in your daily life, how you use it in the classroom, things like that. So I had these 6 major areas that I thought were of interest. And there's just an example of how the survey looked. So this was the survey handout on the left with the code, and on the right Qualtrics with both the web form and then how it would look on a smartphone. So in terms of the results, I did a quick factor analysis just to see if there was any connections and relationships between questions that I hadn't picked up, and I found that there was essentially 5 main factors, which mirrored what I considered to be the major sections, but there was some kind of random crossover between different questions. And that was factor 1 was the attitudes towards ICT in the classroom. 2 was the interest and confidence in using technology. Factor 3 I defined as the skills and views of the ideal self, how you saw yourself. Technological anxiety, factor 4. And factor 5 was the support and shared vision in the school, how teachers and principals, colleagues and workmates and administration, the administration work together. So it's fair to say that people were, for the most part, a little anxious about using technology. There was certainly technological concerns. The respondents clearly wanted to use technology, and they thought it was important to use technology, and they wanted to learn new ways to use it with their students. So they were very open to technology, but they were clearly worried about their technical skills or how they were going to use that technology in class, as we can see here. So I am confident in trying to use technologies by myself. 50%. That's not a great amount. In terms of the teachers' attitudes and beliefs of themselves, again, very positive. Teachers wanted to improve themselves. They wanted to become better teachers, not just for themselves, but as an example there, but also to be an example to my students. I thought it was interesting that the teachers generally weren't worried that the kids would have stronger technical skills than them. That can sometimes be something that would affect a teacher's attitude if they feel like maybe their kids know more than them, that lack of authority, I guess. But that really didn't seem to be an issue. So in general, and also due to the COVID, it seems that has had a very positive impact on how teachers see things like remote teaching or using technology before. Essentially before COVID, work from home in Japan, not a thing. Didn't exist. Literally when it first became an issue, headsets and computers sold out across the country. People were just not ready for it at all. Regarding ICT in the classroom, a little bit more of a mixed bag, but overall teachers thought, yes, ICT in the classroom, good thing. Students engage in it, they find it interesting. A little bit worried that the technology can distract from the learning point, and that's perhaps fed into with the technical problems, being that you're focusing on the tool rather than the class, which is a very fair comment. And again, that perhaps leading into, well, if we're using this ICT, it's perhaps not encouraging these personal interactions and communication. Again, focusing on the screen or the tool rather than classmates. So generally very positive, but again, worried a little bit about the technical. Will it help? What will help teachers? What did they feel would help them? Having enough ICT equipment available for everybody, I think that's been sorted out in the last 3 months. Basic training and more time for self-study. Time comes up again as an issue for teachers in Japan. They just don't have enough time. And ongoing training and IT support. Biggest obstacles for teachers. No IT staff to fix the technical problems. There's no on-site IT staff. I believe there's a few people at the Board of Education, but yeah, and that no free time to learn new technology. And then 3, 4, and 5 essentially need more training. I need ongoing training, basic training and support. Perhaps no surprises there, but that time and training kind of fits in together again and again and again in Japanese teachers' lives. So looking at this, as I mentioned, time. The teachers don't have enough time. They've got class loads, they've got homerooms, they've got clubs that they need to look after, then they've got marking and testing, and then they've been thrown new textbooks this year. There's a whole new curriculum this year. And then let's bring in GIGA School. It defies my mind how they have any time to do anything, really. And this can only feed into this lack of technical skill. You can only improve your skill if you spend time playing with technology and getting used to it. So in that sense, ongoing support could be really the big issue at the end of the day. There is this underlying attitude that perhaps ICT doesn't enhance learning, or it's not going to be used enough to be effective, or students will be focusing on the tool more than the task. And it's also is kind of backed with the motivation and self-efficacy. What scope do teachers have to do things the way they want? To be honest, it's pretty good in Mihara. Teachers are given a lot of free rein as to how they want to use this ICT in class, and they're very much encouraged to use it. And also this ideal and possible selves. There's clearly a thread of, I want to be proficient in this, I want to be better at this, I want to be a good example, but I'm worried. I'm scared about how this is all going to play out, and can I see myself reaching that future ideal self in my mind? As a bit of an aside, I just ran some quick stats on the implications of age and gender and experience, back to that digital native thought put forward by that fellow before. Sorry, I forgot his name. The difference between seeing the benefits of technology versus the confidence to use that technology, that seems to come up again. So people clearly see the benefits, but the question is, how do I do it? I don't have the confidence to do it. Older teachers were marginally less confident, but it didn't seem to be really a big gap there between the older and the younger teachers. However, the older teachers were more likely to disagree about statements regarding the benefits of ICT. Didn't seem to be too much difference between gender. It seemed that the women were slightly more open to using the technology, and they had a positive outlook of themselves and their ideal selves, whereas men were slightly less anxious about the technical issues, the fiddly bits. Now, the survey limitations. Now, the inherent bias with this online survey is you're going to get respondents who are more comfortable with ICT. That at this point was unavoidable. Some questions were also way too broad. For example, how do participants define support? That could really be potentially helped with more one-on-one interviews with people to get some more feedback. What do you mean by support? Support from the BOE, training, monetary, time off, that kind of thing. Preferably further surveys would be sent out using Google Classroom. However, then you're getting into an area where anonymity couldn't be guaranteed to the same extent. So would you get as honest answers? Very hard to say. Now, the recommendations were, increased support from school and BOE, whether that's financial, whether that's more IT support as with the dedicated IT staff, recognizing people's time pressures and their workloads and giving them time to spend self-training, increasing collegiate culture and having teachers work together to bounce ideas and teach each other. and ongoing professional development with that, that TPACK framework, and as is being pushed by the Department of Education, working towards this more constructivist approach. So some quick observations at schools after the 3 months of implementation. So per 50-minute class, prep and pack up takes a lot of time, like easily 5+ minutes, which means your class is now 45 minutes and potentially 40 minutes after faffing about. But teachers are asking, well, if the students keep Chromebooks out between class, they won't be monitored as to what they're doing on the Chromebooks. So these are the things that the teachers are going to have to, and schools are going to have to find out. Students, for the most part, have very limited PC skills. As I mentioned before, what's the shift button? Very basic, rudimentary. But teachers are actively looking to use ICT in the classroom, like real-time shared documents and inputting results and graphing things at the same time, running stats in math class, real-time, things like that. Still, many teachers haven't created their own classrooms, and it doesn't seem to be consistent across all the schools. But for the most part, the school principals have been very supportive, and they want teachers to use this ICT in class. So they are very much pushing this to happen. So personal observations. Having consistent hardware and software is fantastic. Knowing all the students are on the same platform and we can all see the same thing makes life a lot easier, as opposed to bring your own device. Google Classroom is often unintuitive. I think that's said about a lot of Google products, and just some basic things that just doesn't do for some reason. A lot of trial and error about what activities work and is this genuinely useful, and that feeds into how to effectively integrate this ICT once the novelty has worn off. Oh, we're using computers to do games. And it's like, well, but have those games really helped the students? Very different skill levels of students. There doesn't seem to be any real plan to have students do courses to get them to a base level of technical skill, which means a lot of the time you're explaining just how to use the tool rather than to do something useful with it. And as I mentioned before, unfortunately at this point there's no plans to allow the students to take the Chromebooks home, which really negates one of the major benefits. And a problem facing Japan is that it levels that educational access playing field. If everybody has their computer at home, they can look up, do homework, do activities, do research, and that I think is really going to be where this kind of thing really comes in handy. So there's some references there, and I'll put this up as a PDF and slideshow on the JAL Call website. I won't ask for any questions because this is a video, but hopefully this has been interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or have any suggestions for future studies, or pointing me in the right direction if I've got something completely wrong, please send an email to Matthew French at lexisandlines.com. Sorry, that should be Matthew French at lexisandlines.com. I'll put that up at the beginning. So hopefully you enjoyed that and got something out of it, and thank you very much. Cheers.